I'm gonna make this part kind of quick. I've never filmed a video before for YouTube in any really serious fashion, but I am in Piedmont, South Carolina right now, walking up a dirt road off the side of the highway, or a very busy road, to the Charles family cemetery, my family's cemetery. It is back here in the woods. I'm perpetually nervous about coming back here. I've been told not to come back here alone because there was a homeless camp and stuff back here up until not too long ago. And I even remember seeing it myself. But I'll tell you more about why I'm coming here and why I am here when I'm sure that I'm alone. So this is the Charles family cemetery. This is my family's cemetery. I am descended from 4 people who are buried here, at least that I know of, but I may have some ancestors going back into the late 1700s who are buried here. You can see there's a lot of headstones knocked over, even some that are not there where they're supposed to be. And that's because the cemetery tragically was vandalized in the last few months. So this is my 5th great-grandfather's headstone. It was pushed over. That one right there, that's my 5th great-grandmother, his first wife. This was already broken. They pushed that box mausoleum, the lid off of it. This was already off. That was already broken. They kicked that tablet off the top. You can see there's 2 that are alike and one's on the ground. They pushed this headstone over. This is my 4th great aunt. That's my 4th great uncle. There, meaning 4 generations back, he's my uncle. These 2 headstones were broken. Both of them, one of these was stolen. We don't know where it is or where it was taken. This headstone was broken off and drug over here and left here. And then this one was already broken. But aside from what they stole, they also just went through and pushed over anything that they could get pushed over. That headstone right there was stolen. You can see where it was smashed off in the ground. And why, what for, God only knows why somebody would do something like this. That headstone was broken and stolen. These were pushed over. And this was just done in the last few months. But the cemetery, there's been a burial here up until as recent as 2010. So the vandalism is certainly going to take a lot of time and money and effort to resolve. They tried to get that one over, but they couldn't. I don't know why they didn't mess with this one. They just went and pushed them over where they could get them pushed over. A lot of these will take a hoist or a crane to repair, unfortunately. But this is the beginning of my documenting the cemetery. There are 47 named individuals that are buried in the cemetery. However, as you can see from all those field stones, and there's different rock markers in different places, and the cemetery is not just 47 people. There are quite a number more. And the cemetery was vandalized once before, believe it or not. Somebody smashed, I think, these 3 mausoleums in an attempt to rob the grave, when originally they would have looked more like that, which is the older style. That one was smashed in. I remember seeing a picture of that on findagrave.com. These are my 6th great grandparents, John Charles and Elizabeth Charles Garrison Charles. Those are some of the original rocks from their graves. But I'm going to be blowing the leaves out of here, picking up the limbs, cutting back the brush, hopefully securing the cemetery a little bit more, and being able to put up some cameras, maybe some no trespassing signs to try to protect the place from any more vandalism, because people definitely come back here to drink and do other things they really shouldn't do in a cemetery. But yeah, this place, you can see, is there's a lot of people buried here. This is a final resting place for many people, and it's just a shame that it was treated this way. And you can see beforehand, before it was vandalized, it was in really good shape. It's not totally overgrown. It's been kept up off and on over the years. But I'm aiming to keep it up a little bit better, being that the cemetery is perhaps 200 years old. You can see there's a sink here. You might not be able to see it on camera, but definitely an unmarked grave. And interestingly enough, that way there's an abandoned house, and that is the John Charles house, presumably that John Charles who's buried up there. But the house, you can't see it through the trees. It's just a few hundred yards away, and it was lived in up until the last 15 or 20 years, when the current occupants moved out, and it's not been lived in since. There were a lot of squatters that ended up moving in back there and did a lot of damage to the house. A lot of the copper was stolen, and then of course, if the copper's being stolen, so is anything else of value the scrappers got. I do think I might see a homeless camp back here. The homeless people were driven out when they started to grade this property back here, but that's not to say that there's not still some hanging around. You can still see people that are dumping trash back here. But when I first came here 3 years ago in 2020, there were tents and all kinds of things back here where people were living. As I also understand it, there was a camper on a side road back there. All that property's been graded, or it was back here. And that went to a little old country farmhouse, which is gone now. All that was graded into non-existence. The house was torn down, of course. But yeah, there was a camper back there. Apparently there were some people cooking meth back there in the camper. But this is the road that goes around the cemetery. It's quite interesting, this property. It's amazing to think that my ancestors lived here and came to the cemetery here, or buried here, even up to 200 years ago now. It's just very moving to think that this was their land, and this was where they made their livelihood and all that good stuff. So we really want to try to secure the land to prevent development from encroaching on it too much, and at least the cemetery, to protect the cemetery. And I'm about to tell you about something that kind of turned this whole thing on its head for me after I discovered the vandalism and realized, I really got to clean this place up and protect it. Is that there is a slave cemetery out here, believe it or not. They are the slaves of the Charles family. And the cemetery is not marked on any maps, but nonetheless, it is here somewhere. But I'm going to tell you where I think it is, and that is right over here. So just a short distance from the Charles Cemetery is the Charles Slave Cemetery, we believe. So we know from historic record that there was a slave cemetery, or is one, in this vicinity. But I ended up finding that out after I found all of these carved, some of them carved field stones. And they're in piles and they're spread around. But if you know cemeteries, and if you know old cemeteries, then you know a field stone when you see one out in the woods. And a field stone is a rock marker for a headstone. I apologize for all the noise from the road, but there was and is a slave cemetery out here, and we believe these are the headstones that once marked the graves. There's probably, 15 or 20 of them out here, and I may be standing in the slave cemetery now, but given that all the rocks are piled up over here, we believe that more than likely the cemetery was either in the road and was moved out of the way, as in the road that goes around the cemetery, or it may have been out in the actual paved road some time ago when the road was expanded or built. They built over the slave cemetery, which is tragic, disgusting, but unfortunately it does happen with frequency. If I were a betting man, I would say that these were the markers that marked the graves of the enslaved people of the Charles family. Just wonder if these little marks you see on there are engravings. Oops, dropped my self-defense stick. But there's one right there. I'd be willing to bet there could be more throughout here, but we would really like to know where the slave cemetery is and protect it from being built over, because there's a huge business park being built right over there. You can almost see where the trees stop through there. And you know, up until 3 years ago, this was all just acres and acres and acres of forest, but this area is growing up, it's developing, and the developers are keen to do what they're going to do, so means we've got to look out carefully for our history. I'm just looking for any markings or engravings, but gosh, these are field stones if I've ever seen them. You know, they only use certain rocks that looked a certain way to mark the graves. I took this with me just because I didn't know who I would see back here. Like I said earlier, I was advised not to come here alone, but here I am. That one's kind of standing up right there, but it could have just been piled up that way. But we are determined to find the slave cemetery, identify it, and protect it. It may not be an easy task, but it's very important to do it. We're going to. I'm just kind of looking for any other obvious signs of maybe the slave cemetery, if somebody piled up the field stones and didn't do anything with the property. It's hard to say. There's still a fair amount of garbage back here, but at least it's not new garbage. I don't see anything that says cemetery to me, but of course, when they've been neglected for 150 plus years potentially, there's not always a big sign that's going to tell you, oh hey, look, it's right here, here's the cemetery. But you can look for sinks, changes, differentiations in the soil. I'm just hoping I'm not going to run into anybody I don't want to talk to out here. I am in touch with the property owner. He's a nice guy who is actually also a descendant of some of the folks here at the Charles Cemetery, like I am. But yeah, it's going to be a bit of a task to get the garbage cleaned up and figure out where the slave cemetery is before the developers build an office on top of it, which is not a very pleasant thought. But we'll be bringing in some trash bags and cleaning up all this garbage and putting up hopefully some signs that says to people, you know, if you do this kind of thing, you're not going to be or let off easy, given that it's a rather rotten thing to do to throw your trash in a cemetery. But it seems to be happening fairly frequently because I don't recognize some of this trash from the last time I was here a few weeks ago. But this is the Charles Cemetery. This is part of my family's history. I'm lucky to live about 40 minutes away from it. And I'm looking forward to recovering it and cleaning it up and fixing what can be fixed, and maybe getting some replacement markers for those whose headstones were not left here, unfortunately. And hopefully we can return the Charles Cemetery to a place of peace and rest that it was before it had been disturbed. I hate to say that was done twice, but I think the most recent occurrence of vandalism, being that headstones were actually stolen, is perhaps the worst. worst part of it, but maybe we'll find them. Maybe we'll recover them. The headstones were from 1872, 1874, and 1864. But that's the cemetery. Just filmed for like 15 minutes, almost, a little short, but 15 minutes, and just, I don't know if I even really talked about anything that made a lot of sense, but I am here in the Charles family cemetery in Piedmont. This is my family cemetery. It was vandalized, and I'm going to restore it. Interestingly enough, I kind of do this work already. I'm already in the cemetery conservation repair business, but more in the historical, the life of historical pursuits, and trying to learn more about history and make it so that other people can learn more about it. And repairing headstones is a good way of making sure history is there for people to see it themselves, because cemeteries are always incredible places if you are willing to do a little research and look into the people who are buried there. But I've got a lot of work ahead of me. Stuff's knocked over everywhere. Can't do anything about the 3 headstones that aren't here anymore, because when they were smashed, they were stolen. We're gonna figure it out. Field stones, pile of them there, scattered pile of them here, one right there. There's like 3 separate piles, and then a few scattered around. Got another pile right here, pile of field stones. I mean, they've got to be. I mean, look at that. Look at that's carved. That's carved right there. If that's not a field stone, wouldn't know what it is. Look at that. That almost looks carved too. But these are the supposedly, more than likely, the field stone markers. Here's the 3rd pile from the Charles family slave cemetery, which would have been established either at this point or somewhere in this area, maybe in the 1810s or 1820s, if I were to make a guess. Given that the field stones look like they've been moved, it's piled up, it's very hard to say where the cemetery really was. If it was here, the Charles family cemetery is just over here. So it's possible that the 2 cemeteries were located close to one another, or when this road, which is a major road, was built right here going through the south end of Greenville County, it's very likely that the cemetery was destroyed or moved. When they say they moved the cemetery, it's kind of hard to believe them a lot of the time, because all they do is take all the field stones and pile them up somewhere, or just bulldoze it and then say, yeah, we moved the cemetery. Well, where? I'd like to know. This is where the tents were. This is part of what was the homeless camp, and with probably some burials over here, if I were to be a guessing or a betting man. But there's still a good bit of real estate for burials in the cemetery. I think I would like to be buried here when my time comes, given that I'm a descendant of the creators of this cemetery. But see, those look like field stones to me right there. Perhaps grave markers. It's very tragic what was done here. The vandalism did thousands of dollars in damage. That's interesting. I didn't realize that this grave has a field stone and something else to it as well. But I don't know why they didn't push that one over. But they pushed that one over, pushed that one, broke that one, stole it, hoping to find those maybe off in the woods somewhere. One of the headstones they broke is actually still here. They broke 4 and stole 3. So there are 3 headstones missing. See some field stones bunched up in the leaves there. There's one of our missing headstones. They kicked it over or something and took it with them. It's not here anymore. I don't know why they left stuff like this alone and didn't bother it, which was already loose. But there's a footstone, I bet, for this little boy, Johnny Adams, right here, buried with his brother, I believe. I think that's another child's headstone. It's a project. It'll be a process, but it's going to be worth it because these people's lives meant something, and they do mean something now, even if they have been deceased for a long time.